Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast brought to you by BetMGM. This is the Group of Five Deep Dive. A reminder to our audience that you can follow along with our bets as we put in our futures, win totals coming up here in the offseason, all the way into week 0 over at the Action app. That's BBOC G5 Deep Dive. And if you're missing Stuckey, Colin Wilson, and Brett McMurphy, as Mike Iannello and I desperately are, you're in luck. They're back next week with episodes of the new BCS. It's going to be next Thursday, and they're going to be hitting you during the off season every other week. So it'll be good to have them back. But this here in G5 land is our second part of our draft special, as we like to call it, graduation day. All of our G5 heroes working their way up, hopefully hearing their name called in Kansas City, having a team by the end of draft weekend. Some of these guys perhaps could be undrafted free agents, but we're going to get into all of them in this particular episode, going through position by position, the players we really like, trying to give you a little insight for some of those, keeper leagues, dynasty leagues, campus to canon, whatever fantasy format you're playing. The lifeblood of it is catching these rookies early and making sure that you are on the bandwagon as early as we were. In some cases, these guys we were rooting for them for many years. We had a little pennant, Jake Haener, one of them. Let's get started there, Iannello. What are your thoughts on this quarterback class, and how much do you love Jake Haener?
I would say you're talking bandwagons. There's no better place to start than Jake Haener season in full effect. Look, at the end of the day, the dude is just a winner. Like I love him. He just wins. In 3 years at Fresno State, he was 18-4 in games he finished over the last 2 years. 67 touchdowns, just 7 picks, threw for over 9,000 yards. And we talked about the last show when we were talking about the big guys. The two things I look at to kind of help me get sold on G5 guys is their talent level. Do they have Power 5 talent, and how do they do against the Power 5? First of all, he started his career at Washington. He had Power 5 offers coming out of high school. They even wanted him last year. There was like that weird thing where he kind of like half transferred and then decided to stay. And there were other Power 5 teams that were interested in him. So he had the ability to play at a Power 5 level. And you look at him against the Power 5, 298 yards and a touchdown against Oregon, almost beat them. He was basically like limping the entire game. 380 yards and 4 touchdowns against UCLA, did beat them. DTR is probably going to get drafted before him. Jake Haener outplayed him on the same field. 260 and a touchdown against Oregon State, a touchdown against USC before getting hurt. He played like a half at 117 yards, 280 yards and 2 touchdowns against Washington State in the bowl game. In 5 games against Power 5 competition, he had 9 touchdowns and just 1 pick. And he balled out in all of those games and almost beat all of them, basically. So I love that. I know you've used the term popcorn arm before. Yes, he does not have the strongest arm. He is on the smaller side. Let's see, what's he listed at? 6 flat if he's lucky, maybe. But guess what? Number 1 overall pick is going to be less than 6 feet. So who cares? He's just all heart. You can't measure heart, Calabrese. You can't measure heart. He's all heart, all balls. He's super smart. Always seems to kind of, make the right play. He is one of the better pre-snap adjustment guys as terms of the G5 level. He's not one of those quarterbacks that just like stares at the sidelines and then says hike. He's reading the secondary. He's picking up blitzes before the snap and moving guys around, which you don't often see at the G5 level. He's one of those guys that does seem to make adjustments before the play. He's really good at picking up the blitz. He's not like a freak athlete, but he's pretty mobile in the pocket. He kind of reminds me a little bit of my boy Trace McSorley. He's kind of got a little Trace McSorley in him. Maybe not the best NFL comparison, but where he's kind of small, but he's just ballsy. He's probably a 4th-round pick, but to me, for my money, after Young, Stroud, Richardson, Levis, and Hooker, I think you can make a case Jake Haener is the next best quarterback.
I think you can make that case, certainly. I think that's more of an indictment of this quarterback draft class because, in my opinion, he probably should be more of a 6th or 7th round pick. And I think he could be a solid backup in the NFL. He's an anticipatory thrower. He's really good in the short and intermediate area. He makes the right decision almost all the time. The ball gets out of his hands really quickly,
Yeah.
which in the modern NFL, where there's more RPO layered into the offense, you got to make these quick reads. I think he could be a good student of the game and be helpful in the quarterback room right away. My biggest concern is obviously There's nothing he can do to become a better downfield passer. It's not like hit the weight room or, do some kind of exercise. All of a sudden the ball's exploding out of your hand. When he throws the ball more than 30 yards downfield, it flutters, it can be flat, and it's not going to take the top off the defense.
Tell you what, hey, Chad Pennington had a hell of a career for himself.
I agree. I think there's an opportunity for him to be a fringe starter, quality backup for the majority of his career. The injury thing, I think, is also the element that caps him the most, which is like if he's playing 17 regular season games per season as a starter, there's no way he's making it a full year without getting hurt because he just gets ragdolled in some of these games. And I agree, he's an incredibly tough kid. He played through injury in that upset against UCLA where like he could barely like swing his hips around. Like he's got moxie, all the words you want to use. But the best ability in the NFL is availability. I want that kid on the field leading my offense. So I wouldn't take him in the 4th round. I take him in the later stages, but I do think he's going to be a quality backup. And you kind of teed it up that I was going to crap on this kid. That's the worst I'm going to say about him. Unlike this next quarterback on the list, Clayton Toune, who threw 30 interceptions the last 3 years. I've officially had it. You know what? I'll go back in time. I had it when...
Wait. When you said you wanted to talk Toune and I said I wanted to talk Haener, I thought you were going to argue Toune as the guy over Haener. Wow, this is a surprising turn of... I thought you were going to try to make a case that Toune's better than Haener. So I'm going to
go back in the Wayback Machine here, and this is when I officially lost it, and it was the Sam Darnold year when he went at the very top of the draft. When you have turnover problems in college, they never get fixed. They didn't get fixed with Jameis Winston. They didn't get fixed with Darnold. And I certainly don't think they're going to get fixed with Clayton Toune because what does he do? He stares down his receiver. If we're going to give kudos to Haener, which I think he deserves for going through his reads and always being in the right position, in terms of accuracy with placement, Toune's on the other side of it. Like he can absolutely throw a dime 40 yards downfield to an open receiver, and he can make plays scrambling out of the pocket. And he had some exciting tape and some big wins and some big stats last year. I mean, he had 7 touchdowns in that loss to SMU. It wasn't his fault. He wasn't playing defense. But I also look at the early portion of that.
I think he did have 2 picks in that game, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he probably did. And then on top of things, like they came in, they were supposed to be in the conversation the entire year to beat the G5 automatic bid. And what do? They score 30 points and lose to Texas Tech. That Texas Tech defense outside of Wilson on the edge stunk. They just did not have enough guys to play at the Power 5 level and be competitive, let alone against Houston. He didn't play well. And then they only scored 30 points against Kansas. I know Kansas was resurgent offensively, but the Jayhawks defense should have got lit up. So I'm going to hold it against them. I'm going to hold it against, Holgerson's system. It's supposed to make quarterbacks look good. It made Geno Smith look like a Heisman caliber quarterback, 10, 15 years ago, whenever it was. So at this point, I'm out on him completely, and it's totally turnover based. He has much better physical tools. He's a bigger guy, the quote unquote prototypical build, all that. I'm not taking him. In a year like this, I'd rather have Haener with the expectation I'm not bringing a guy in to be my starter. Like maybe an emergency Brock Purdy situation if all the stars align and the rest of your roster is really good. I think Haener could go in and be successful as well. But with Toune, I just don't trust him with the turnovers. What are your thoughts on the Cougs QB1?
Yeah, it's almost like, basically everything you touched on, I have in my notes too. It's like with him, I'm always torn on him. Even through college, I was torn on him because his good is really good, but his bad is really bad. You mentioned the picks. He fumbled a ton in college. That was another thing that he got a little better as he got older, but that older is another thing. He was in college for 5 years, and he did get better each season, which is like a good thing, but he's already I think he's 25 years old, something like that. He's more athletic than Haener. He's obviously bigger, does have a stronger arm, but you mentioned he is way more careless with the football. And what Haener is excellent at in reading defenses and progressing, that's what Toune's bad at. And I kind of teased it last episode with the Tank Dell talk. If Tank Dell was covered, Toune was screwed. He panicked. He got in trouble. His arm is better, but he almost relies on that. Where like if Toune's running an out route, or if Dell's running an out route, Toune would just stare at him and he'd make his break and he would try to just throw a rocket to the sidelines and it'd get picked off every time. So, he tested well at the combine, which helped his stock. I think he's faster than I thought he was, to be honest. You mentioned the Hogo system, which is his biggest downfall, but also I think Toune has enough arm talent where if he's in a system that can just scheme guys open, if he was on the 49ers, I think he would be a good backup for Jalen Hurts, to be honest. I love Hurts. This isn't trying to take anything away from Hurts, but the Eagles offense is very good at like putting Hurts in a position to succeed and scheming guys open. And with the weapons they have, like to me, Toune's obviously not as athletic as Hurts, but he would be a good backup for Jalen, where it's like if Devontae Smith's wide open, like Toune can hit him. And that's kind of what he needs because he's not good enough at throwing guys open or anticipating. He needs a guy open and then he can hit him. So I do think he's, a fifth, sixth round pick, like you said. He's probably has the arm talent to be a backup, but I don't think he has the, the defense reading skills and kind of anticipation to be anything more than like a, hey, if my guy's hurt, we'll throw Toune in for a week and hope he keeps it close kind of guy.
So we're the G5 guys. We got to keep it positive. Also, this offseason, it's just a deluge of negative talk about the G5. ESPN's power index came out. They had one G5 team in the top 50, and it was SMU at 49. They didn't even have Tulane in the top 50. I've had enough of this G5 slander.
Wait. No, I just wanted this to be really quick. Before we get positive, I want to ask you, because just make sure we're agreement. Another guy that I'm seeing kind of in that fifth, sixth round area. I'm not a big Jaren Hall fan at all. He's another one. He's 25 years old. He's mobile, but I don't love his arm. He's gotten hurt every single season. So I don't really see enough upside with Jaren Hall. I should kind of assume you're in agreement there.
Yeah, I think he's in that developmental sixth, seventh undrafted free agent kind of window. But once again, that's an indictment of how thin this quarterback class is. So I think he'll get a chance. I'm not sure he can seize it.
I hope Holton Ahlers gets a chance. I would love to see Holton Ahlers get drafted in the 7th round.
Holton Ahlers feels like Mr. XFL to me, or if we can like bring back the NFL Europe, like he's a Berlin Dragon or something like that. Like he has that vibe where I want to see him 9 years from now still getting paid to play football, where it's like I could go for 4 touchdowns and 500 yards, or I could turn it over 7 times.
Just let him have his name called.
All right, positivity. Here we go. I am thrilled that this guy has slid in mock drafts. The main reason, he had a hamstring injury, so he didn't do the combine, didn't do his pro day because of the hamstring injury. So now he's in the 3rd or 4th round. I think this guy, depending on fit, everything in the NFL is fit dependent. If he's on the right roster with an opportunity to win the starting role, DeWayne McBride is going to be a starting running back in the NFL. Monster production at UAB. And you and I both know, having watched way too much crappy UAB offense, he was running into 9 and 10 man boxes, and he had 155 yards per game, which led the nation, 7.3 yards per carry, 19 rushing touchdowns. The guy is a wagon. I hate that, that gets thrown around way too liberally in college football and college sports in general, but holy moly.
He's built like a wagon. It's not like wagon as in he's good. He looks like a wagon. He's shaped like the Oregon Trail wagon. He's a monster.
I mean, he reminds me, like when they would talk about the UAB offense, the Courting of Marcus Dupree, that book, and then the ESPN 30 for 30, his high school coach used to say, you know what our play on 3rd and long was? Sweep to Marcus. Well, 3rd and long for UAB was just give the ball to McBride somehow. They didn't throw him the ball very much. I think that's the only legitimate hit that you can put on him. I think he had like 5 receptions last year. But just, do a private workout, find out, like do your due diligence. Like you have to be able to find out talking to coaches and going through some of the practices and everything else. Like, can he catch or not? You don't need him to all of a sudden be one of these incredible, hybrid backs. Like he's never going to be Christian McCaffrey, but he's such a downhill runner. He's explosive.
But he's the perfect guy to play with Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I mean, he could be an interesting change of pace right there. So I think someone's going to get a steal. I would reach into the 3rd round for him. I think he's that good. But I think if he does end up going in the 4th round, it's all about the marriage. If the right NFL team picks him, he could pop from a fantasy perspective right away.
Yeah, could not agree more. Yeah, you mentioned it. The pass game is his only issue. He also did fumble a ton. That's kind of the other one.
Yeah. But I think he had 5 lost fumbles last year, which not great, obviously.
Yeah, you talked about him leading the country in yards per game, and with college, you kind of have to be nervous that not necessarily at the G5 level, but every now and again you'll have a guy that puts up 400 yards against like Little Sisters of the Poor, and it skews the numbers. Not McBride. He had over 120 yards in 10 of his 11 games. So it wasn't just like, he had 2 or 3 monster outings and skewed the. No, he was good in every single game. He finished 4th in the country in yards after contact. He's bigger, but for a big guy, he's not like the fastest,
Yeah.
but he has really good footwork and really good balance. He's like very quick and nimble on his feet. Um, since Pro Football Focus has tracked forced missed tackle rate since 2014, McBride is third since 2014, behind Bijan Robinson and Javonte Williams from UNC a couple years ago. It's pretty good. And the thing I love about him the most is, granted, because he had to do everything for this offense, is I remember like Thanksgiving specifically was kind of stood out at me. There's a couple of games where when if he gets tackled by one guy, he's furious. Like there's a play I remember Thanksgiving where, or yeah, it was Thanksgiving or the day after Thanksgiving that week, because their quarterback got hurt and he basically got 48 carries. And I remember he had like a wide open lane and got tripped up by his ankle and tripped up like after 8 yards instead of getting a first down. And he slammed the football on the ground. He was so pissed that he got tackled by one guy. And I remember seeing it and like turn to my cousin. I'm like, God, I love that guy so much. Like he gets angry with himself if one guy brings him down. He's one of the guys that like seeks contact, just wants to run you over. I agree with you. I think he's tough as nails. He's like the perfect. He's so hard to bring down. He's like the perfect guy in the NFL for like that change of, you think of, maybe if you want to throw him with, like the Eagles, if you want to kind of pair him with what's his face, Kenny Gainwell and like Boston Scott, you throw DeWayne McBride in there. You put him on the Bills with James Cook. They just lost Devin Singletary. James Cook and DeWayne McBride would be a really good kind of 1-2 punch for the Bills. So I'm with you. I love DeWayne McBride, but I teased it last week that there's a guy that the more I like.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear who your running back sleeper is, because I shared with you the other one that I like, and I thought there was a chance this was the guy, but apparently not. So lay it on me.
If you're in a rookie dynasty draft, 3 rounds, McBride probably gets taken in the 3rd round. The guy that probably doesn't get drafted that I'm picking up right away, I love Keaton Mitchell so much. I think Keaton Mitchell is the perfect, late round draft pick, free agency dynasty pickup where it's not going to cost you anything. He's not going to cost you draft capital. If he doesn't pan out, you can just drop him for nothing. But I think he has the potential to be one of those, like, who the hell is this guy monster kind of breakouts. So he shared the backfield basically his whole career at ECU, which I think hurt him, with Najee Harris, who was a stud. Najee Harris was all like ACC his freshman year, I think. And, Harris on the team freshman year. Mitchell had 10. Oh, he only had 10 more carries than Harris in 2021. He had double his yards. Last year, Harris gets hurt in week 5. Sucked for ECU. Good for Keaton Mitchell. Mitchell averaged 145 yards over the last 7 weeks of the season, 7.2 yards per carry, only behind McBride in the year. He is stupid fast. He ran a 4.37 at the combine, and honestly, he looked faster on the field. I thought a 4.37 was slow for him because he looks so much faster because he is very small. His foot speed is off the charts. He is so quick. He's so good at just juking and dancing around defenders, just like a little. I love watching him. He uses his size well. He has a really low center of gravity, takes advantage of it. He runs low to the ground. He's patient, just kind of dances, hides behind his lineman, sees the hole. He's gone. He's good in the passing game. On the opposite of McBride, he didn't fumble the ball once all season, which I love. His biggest downside is obviously going to be his size. He's small. He also just refuses to run between the tackles. Like, he bounces everything to the outside, but he's so fast that he can kind of get away with it. And I have a question for you, Breeze. Pop quiz. Do you remember the last undersized running back who's super fast that came out of East Carolina?
We talking about CJ2K, Chris Johnson?
CJ2K. Oh, and by the way, Keaton Mitchell had 45 more yards in college than Johnson did on 160 less carries. So I'm not going to say he's better than Chris Johnson, but he was in college. So I think he's shifty and he's quick enough that he's talking about these, everything in the NFL now is these 2-back system. He's honestly, draft McBride and Keaton Mitchell, and you have yourself a hell of a backfield. He's the perfect change of pace back. And to me, his ceiling in the NFL is kind of, Raheem Mostert, Antonio Gibson, who's another guy, by the way. Antonio Gibson basically split the whole backfield with Kenneth Gainwell in college. It wasn't really that good in college, to be honest with you. And then was great his first few years in Washington. You look at Tariq Cohen. To me, that's another guy. And to me, his floor is like Boston Scott, who's a very productive. Like, would you rather have Boston Scott or Keaton Mitchell? Because to me, I'd rather have Keaton Mitchell, and Scott has been pretty good on the Eagles for the last couple of years. So I love Keaton Mitchell. He's a guy where, with that Raheem Mostert kind of Tariq Cohen ceiling, I'm going to take a flyer on Keaton Mitchell in my dynasty draft for sure.
I'll wrap up my running back position with one of the best nicknames in all of college football history, Lamborghini Laborn from Marshall. He's the beneficiary of Rasheen Ali being sidelined for the majority of the season. He comes in as, there's actually, I think Rivals had him as a 5-star out of high school in Florida State, 4 stars everywhere else. 5'11", 200 pounds, ran a 4.5 40, elite vertical and broad jump. And he was a monster in the weight room, 23 reps on the bench press at 225. So that was tremendous when you pair it with his production in this season at Marshall, 1,500 yards, 16 TDs. He's not someone who's necessarily that home run hitter. So I do think that's going to put him more in a running back by committee situation and not necessarily the upside of some of the backs we've mentioned earlier, in the pod here. But I think he's a great guy to add, and certainly where you can get him, 5th, 6th, 7th round. I've seen multiple mock drafts. He's not drafted at all. I think that's wrong, given his overall talent, the fact that he refused to give up on this dream. He had some injuries, he had a transfer, he had to wait, and when he got the opportunity, he thrived. I think that speaks positively to his overall character. And the other element of it is, yes, he had spent all these years in college, but not much tread on the tires. So in terms of like what he had to, carry in terms of overall workload, he only had 1 season there at Marshall. So I'm big on this guy. I would add him, certainly if he's there in the 6th round, take a shot on a player like this, because I think the name of the game is looking for those undervalued assets. And I think he's top of the board in terms of that category, in my opinion.
Yeah. To me, it's like, there's kind of 3 guys I was kind of like circling to be like, 6th, 7th. It's him. It's Lou Nichols, the 3rd, who, it was a weird case because he literally led the entire country in rushing 2 years ago, and then had a really disappointing last year. Kind of battled injuries. Cameron Peoples, another one that probably gets his name called. He kind of split a backfield at App State his whole time there. So
yeah, Cam Peoples, to me, whenever I watched him play, he always flashed where it's like, this guy should be the lead. He should be getting 85% of the carries. It was just a situation where they were so deep, and they could bring in different skill position players to run the ball in waves.
Yeah, him and
so
Noel.
That was always their mindset.
Yeah, so Cameron Peoples is a guy I would, all these guys are going to need to be, they're never going to be like a lead back. But to me, we mentioned the first 2 guys. That's kind of why I'm higher on them, is because at least they have an elite skill set. Mitchell with his speed, and what's his face with his strength. So McBride with his strength. So I think Nichols and Peoples are kind of, and Laborn are kind of those last couple rounds. Just take a flyer on them.
All right, what if we switch to wide receiver? You good on the running back room? You feel like you've said your piece? All right, I'm going to go with a player that's pure tape versus measurables. Had an awful, disastrous pro day. I can't imagine what it's like to set up your pro day and it's going bad, and you still have like 5 drills to go through. It's like his 40 was below average, his vertical, his bench, his broad jump. Talking Puka Nacua, 6'2", 200 pounds. When he was healthy, this guy was a monster. Former 4-star, hurt on and off all throughout 2020. But when you look at his highlights, and this is what we get into when we're talking about the day 3 of the draft, you're looking at the ceiling. So you turn on the tape for the opener, 75-yard rushing touchdown against USF. And there's plenty of offenses in the NFL. It's not just gadget stuff on a one-off basis that like to get these slot receivers and even end arounds involved in the running game. He can do it right away. Then he plays against Arkansas, 8 receptions, 141 yards, touchdown, 2 more rushing TDs. Against Boise, 14 receptions, 157 yards, 2 TDs. That was when he was making Jaren Hall look like an NFL quarterback. And then if you go all the way back to last season against the Big 12 champs in Baylor, 5 receptions, 168 yards, touchdown. He's a big play guy. He flashes great body control. He knows how to get himself open. He knows how to fight for the football. And he's a yak master, pretty much. Just like get him the ball in open space, and he's not going down on that first hit, particularly when it's undersized corners. So the fact is, you have to either put stock in the tape or put stock in the fact that he had a disastrous pro day and maybe he just doesn't have the physicality to play in the NFL. I don't think that's true. I think the only real concern is his injuries. But if you draft him in the 6th or 7th round, like, you're not banking on him being a contributor necessarily to your two deep. You're hoping that he makes the team. You're hoping that he can be that fifth or sixth receiver on your roster. I think he's good enough to be at his very top ceiling if he stayed healthy, a wide receiver 2 in the NFL because of his size and his playmaking ability. What are your thoughts on Nacua?
Yeah, he's such a weird guy to me because, like you said, I mean, you mentioned it with Ehlers, the best abilities availability. That's why it's not a bad late round flyer just because, like you said, okay, if he gets hurt, who cares? 7th round, 6th or 7th round pick. But I do think he has a lot more upside than a lot of these guys. And for me, this was, I think we kind of mentioned it last episode. This is like a weird year for quarterback or for receivers, where I feel like it's not as deep as we've seen in the past like 2-3 years where we've had like these monster classes. So even going through here and trying to be like, okay, who's my favorite receiver I want to talk about? I kind of struggled separating them, to be honest, because they're all, I don't know, they're all just kind of meh. And they're kind of in tiers to me. So I'll honestly just run through a couple guys I had written down quick because I don't have extensive notes on any of them because they're just kind of like, yeah, take a shot. We did mention Tyler Scott last week a little bit, how he's flying up the draft because he ran a 4.37. A couple other guys that'll probably get drafted in that 5th, 6th, 7th round. Trey Tucker from Cincinnati, only a 1-year starter, exclusively played in the slot, small guy but fast. CJ Johnson, I actually really like CJ Johnson. East Carolina, big body, takes really long strides. He's not fast, but he takes like 6 steps and he's 40 yards on the field. Strong hands. He's big enough to break tackles after he catches the ball, which I think teams will like. He's a good like throw it up and let him go get it guy. Grant Dubois from Charlotte, Clublet, shout out. 6'2", 200 pounds, looks like an NFL guy, big body, good ball skills, good route runner. He's just not that fast. He's just really not fast enough to get open. So he's a good depth receiver. And if you're playing against like a zone defense, he's probably a good guy because he can go, get open, like catch the ball in traffic, but he's not really going to burn a guy one-on-one. Jalen Cropper, from Fresno State. Similar to Haener, where he's small, but he's slippery. He's very smart, very good route runner. He's really good at getting open. He's great relationship with him and Haener had such a good connection where he was so good at getting open for Haener. So I think a quarterback probably love having him as like a safety valve.
Yeah, when you talk about Fresno State, I wouldn't actually be shocked if his teammate Nico Remigio ends up making a roster just because he can be a return specialist too.
Yeah,
So maybe he
that's a good
makes the
call.
team as
He's
a
fast.
returner.
He's fast.
Yeah, he was fast, and also he played, at the Power 5 level at Cal. I like a lot of, what Fresno brings to the table in terms of the draft this year, but I just have this sneaking suspicion it's going to be Remigio that ends up making an NFL roster.
I wouldn't hate that at all. Jason Brownlee, Southern Miss, another one. Jalen Wayne, South Alabama. I also just wanted to give a quick shout out. Michael Jefferson from Louisiana was hit head on in a car accident by a drunk driver and is going to miss the entire season. So sucks for him because he's I'm looking right now, 6th round projected on him. Probably doesn't get drafted now. Why would you bother? He's not going to be able to play all year. And, to get hit by a scumbag drunk driver and pretty much cost you your NFL career is just the worst. So absolutely sucks for him. Hopefully he'll recover and someone will give him a chance, but just blows. He's not going to hear his name called because someone had to be an asshole. So sucks for him.
I'll end this on one positive note. One player that I think has a chance to hear his name called, and I think he's a little bit undervalued because of two things. One, inside of his control to a certain degree. He was banged up through his career. He had some issues staying on the field, but also, this is going to be a little toss to you, Ianello. He had Chevin Cordero throwing him the ball. So when you go for nearly 70 receptions, over 1,000 yards, and 10 TDs with Cordero tossing the rock all over the yard, I'm impressed, Elijah Cooks. He's also, and kind of like what you were alluding to, which is when you look through all of these players at the wide receiver position in that rounds 4 through 7 to undrafted range, what pops? What's special? Who's a burner? He's at least big. He's 6'4", and he ran a 4.5. So when I look at his production in a year with a quarterback that I don't think all that much of and his overall size, I think he has a chance to maybe hang on to an NFL roster because he at least brings something a little bit special to the table.
Yeah, the good news too with the wide receivers is while I'm not in love with any of them, looking at prospect rankings, there's not Power 5 guys that are really in this conversation either. Once you get past like the fourth round, like even P5 guys, you're like Raheem Jarrett from Maryland, Justin Shorter from Florida, who as a Penn State guy, he cannot catch a cold. Ronnie Bell from Michigan can't stay healthy. Mitchell Tinsley, Penn State. We do love him. We should talk about Mitchell Tinsley. He's an honorary G5 guy, Western
Yes,
Kentucky.
he absolutely
The
is.
pride
He
and
was
joy
part
of
of
Bailey
the
Zappi.
keeping the Zappy tradition alive. As many sound guns that we can fire in this podcast as possible.
We will find any excuse to just say the word Bailey Zappi. But you remember, I was so pumped when Penn State landed Tinsley, and he was awesome for them this year. He was so good for Cliff. Like him and Clifford had an instant connection. So shout out Mitchell Tinsley. We will fully take credit as for him when he gets drafted as well.
We already touched on the tight end position in the last episode. Zach Kuntz, I'm very high on him. Some people view him as a project. I think he's already ready as a pass catcher to be a significant threat in the NFL. He's going to have to work as an inline blocker and all these other things that if he wants to be an every down tight end, but keeping him as your tight end 2, tight end 3 in a pass heavy offense, I think he could absolutely pop. And particularly in the NFL, there's like 7 or 8 guys who are just studs. They are dudes in the NFL at the tight end position. And then there's just a lot of regular guys. And it's like that revolving door, I think, leaves it open for someone like Kuntz to come in and show what he can do. In 2021, he was a monster. He was, hitting big plays all over the place. We're going to finish it up with 2 more positions. Going to look at linemen, give a little love to the hog mollies up front, and then look at our favorite defensive players. I'm going to go City So from Eastern Michigan. The Great White North producing another one, Canadian superstar, 6'5", 325, mega athletic. He killed it at the combine, 40 vertical broad jump. And I think that's music to the ears of a lot of these offense coordinators and offensive-minded head coaches in the NFL. They want to get people to the second level. Can he do that? He regularly got to the second level as a run blocker, whether he's pulling or he's in the screen game trying to, get downfield. I think that gives him a chance. He played 56 college games because of the COVID year bonus situation. So a ton of experience. He got better and better as it went on. And he played in the NFLPA Collegiate Bowl, performed well there. It's not necessarily as prestigious as, the Senior Bowl, but it did give a little bit of apples to apples comparison. You're not in the MAC anymore. How are you going to do? I think he's someone who's going to hear his name in day 3, and I'm excited for the kid. I love rooting for the Fighting Hurons of Eastern Michigan. So good for him.
Yeah, he's a weird guy too, where he, like you said, 6 years at Eastern Michigan, and he had kind of a weird career where he was an Olympic weightlifter in like high school. He wasn't on online recruiting services. That's why he didn't get recruited, because they don't have internet in Canada apparently. So like nobody knew who he was. The Eastern Michigan staff was like came to this school to like see someone else and like saw him in the parking lot and was like, "You're humongous." And like,
so you are coming with us, sir. Please get into the car.
He played D line in high school. He didn't even play the offensive line. So the fact that he, took him a little more time, but he was all MAC the last 2 years. I love that pick. I'm also going to give some love to the hog mollies up front. Another guy I'm looking at is Nick Saldiveri from Old Dominion.
Mm-hmm.
He's a guy that I really liked. Obviously, I watched more Old Dominion than most people for some reason, because the Wolfpack rides on. The thing with him is a lot of times with another thing, by the way, I like Sal is the same reason, is a lot of the G5 guys that get drafted are the left tackle because they're the biggest, best player on their small school. But they're never big or good enough to play it in the NFL. So they always have to transition. So the fact that Sal was a guard, I love. And Sal Very played right tackle at Old Dominion, which is not common, but I like it because he's not going to play left tackle in the NFL. He didn't allow a sack all season. 6'6", 320 pounds, big guy. He has really, really good feet, but not good hands. Like that's kind of his one area weakness. He has to get better with his hands and get tougher. But he was the team captain. He brought a ton of energy. He was like one of those rah-rah guys that's always like, getting his boys going on the sidelines and the in the huddle, which I'm a sucker for. Versatile guy. During this, you mentioned this, the Senior Bowl. Saldiveri was the same way, where he played tackle, guard, and center throughout the week and like looked good at all 3. So I think a team's going to fall in love with, his versatility, that he can kind of do whatever. So he's another guy I expect to see his name called, that 3rd, 4th, 5th round kind of guy.
All right, we'll wrap up with our defensive players. Darrell Luter Jr. from South Alabama. I love this kid. Last year, he was a Pro Football Focus All-American. Like they really got into just how much of a shutdown corner he was. I wouldn't say that he necessarily took a big step back last year, just statistically, and the overall evaluations on him weren't quite as high. But then he comes back in the Senior Bowl. And what I think is interesting when you listen to GMs and you listen to scouts, the Senior Bowl game is one thing. What they really want to see is the individual drills, particularly when these G5 and FCS guys go up against the Power 5 guys. And he performed particularly well in those situations. And when you pair that with the fact that for the position, he has plus size, he's over 6 feet, 190 pounds, ran in the 4.45 range, a 40.5 vertical as well. So he's someone who I don't think is going to be overmatched physically in the NFL. I think you're going to be able to get him in the middle rounds, and I think he could be a solid second corner in the NFL within a couple of years. He's somewhat. I watched, a lot of South Alabama football with a Troy future ticket last year. They were the team in the West I was worried about, so I ended up watching plenty of Jag football, and he clearly stands out. He's a lockdown corner. I think he got ton of experience being the guy and shutting down a half of the field in college. So I'm pretty bullish on him, and it was enough for me to pick him as one of my two guys here to highlight.
Yeah, I'm complete. Him and Starling Thomas are kind of two corners that I both from UAB. I really like both of them. I think both of them will be successful NFL guys. For my first defender I want to highlight, I actually almost brought him up last week when I was trying to, I went with Dorian Williams. But here's another guy I think honestly could be a third round pick as high as that. I love JL Skinner from Boise, safety from Boise State. I think
he's got that great size. I mean, he's knocking people around.
He's a perfect NFL frame, and his one weakness to me is the easiest thing to fix in the NFL is that he's skinny. It's just put on muscle mass. That's literally all he needs. NFL.com actually has him ranked as the third best safety in the draft behind Antonio Johnson and Jair Brown. So he's super experienced. He's played 44 games over 4 years for Boise State. You mentioned it. 6'3", 210 pounds. He's got freakishly long arms, and he is not afraid to tackle. He had 92 tackles in 2021. He just sticks his nose in the running game, loves to hit. He'll miss the occasional tackle because he is so thin. If he just, he'll kind of swing and miss. But what I love about him too is he didn't tackle as much last year because they didn't need it. They had really good linebackers. They needed him to help with the run game in 21, and he did it. Last year, they're like, we have a really good front seven. We need you more in the secondary, and he thrived in that. He has excellent timing, never takes penalties. He got called for one flag all last year, and it was targeting, and it was questionable at best. He had 4 interceptions, good ball skills. He didn't participate in the combine because he tore his pec training, which does suck. And maybe that's why he falls to third or fourth. Honestly, he probably could be a second round pick if he ran and did all the combine stuff. He's thin, like I said, but he loves to tackle. I think if he bulks up in the NFL, he is a legitimate NFL starter right away. I am all in on JL Skinner.
I'm going to close with someone I'm all in on. I'm going to predict that he's going to hit double-digit sacks at some point in his NFL career. And I think the secret's out on Jose Ramirez from Eastern Michigan. Big Shrine Bowl performance confirms what he can do against better talent. His measurables are fantastic. So he ran a 4.740, great shuttle, vertical, broad, 3-cone drill, all of it at the combine. He was all in that 90th percentile or better. 6'2", 245 pounds, 19 and a half tackles for loss in 2022. In the modern NFL, where you want to bring in those pass rushers, kind of that revolving door and rotating in, and maybe in his rookie year he gets 10 to 15 snaps, I think he's going to be disruptive. He has a lot of creative pass rush moves as well, so he's not just a pure speed rusher off the edge. And that production, almost in 20 TFLs in a college season, I know it's the MAC. I understand that, but this guy was just an absolute stud who got better and better. And really, when you read some of a bit of it's smokescreen, a bit of it's, scout speaks, however you want to frame it, but more and more positive things are coming out about this guy before the draft. So I could see him maybe in the 4th round and certainly being a contributor during his rookie year. And like I said, I just think he has everything that it takes from a physicality perspective. You want to have that short burst speed and being able to, essentially lunge at the quarterback and be disruptive, putting your hands up. He can do all of those things. It'd be nice if he was a little bit heavier. Maybe he can put on that weight in the proper way and not lose that speed in the NFL. But I'm big on Jose Ramirez. He's my guy. He's my defensive sleeper for this draft.
Yeah, I had two edge rushers written down. Ramirez was one of them. Everyone remembers the Harold Perkins game against Arkansas, right? The second, award winner for most dominant single hand defensive performance might go to Ramirez against Western Michigan. If you remember that game, he had
4 sacks at least, I
he
think,
had,
in that
he had
game.
4 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, 8 tackles. He like they won 45-23, and he just absolutely wrecked havoc in that game. I agree with you. 12 sacks. He was a monster. He's not really good at anything but getting after the passer. So he needs to get better in the run defense just to kind of be out there on more than just third down, pin your ears back. But I agree with you. He is like the perfect guy of like, your team has a lead and the other team has the ball in the fourth quarter. There is few players I would want on the field more than Jose Ramirez. Is just pin your ears back, go get the quarterback, end the game. I think he is perfect for that. And I'll go with a similar guy that I love is I never know how to say his first name. Viliami uh, Vahoko from San Jose State. He was very similar. Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year, 19 tackles for loss, 9 sacks last year. He has great instincts, really, really good pass moves. He's one of those guys that spin moves, rips. He does everything. He has so many fun moves that like he just breaks out. He's got all the skill in the world. He just lacks that, true NFL size and speed, which is probably why, he won't go until the fifth, sixth round. He's Vita Vea's cousin, which I always love kind of having the bloodline. And, so Vahoko is kind of my other guy that I would go with. Him and Ramirez are kind of my two edge rushers that I really like both of them.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, San Jose State, I remember back when we were talking to Colin Wilson. I think he was in a hotel room. He's probably at some, media day. I assume he
Did he
probably
go
had
to this?
press credentials around his neck, but he was talking up San Jose State and the defense put it together. We were trying to talk him off of that because of Chevin Cordero, but
Was that the pot I called him an idiot because he thought he said they were going to win 9 games?
yes. So in some ways you were right. In some ways he was right. And certainly on the defensive side of things, this guy being the standout. So I agree with you. There was a lot more to like, I think, in the front seven defensively in this draft. And I think there's going to be some real stars that are going to emerge, whether they end up hearing their name in Kansas City or not. I think there's going to be some valuable players that are going to make rosters from the undrafted pool as well. Just kind of one of those weird years where you didn't see a lot of absolute burners on the perimeter at wide receiver or running backs who were really versatile. A lot of the backs we talked about, they're really good at one thing. And, that's kind of the Achilles heel, kind of getting on the field in the NFL. You got to be able to pick up blitzes. You got to be at least serviceable in the pass game. You see it with elite coaches like Andy Reid, where when he's playing running back by committee, one of his running backs drops a pass. It's like, well, great. I won't see him for 3 more weeks. Like he's just basically in the doghouse kind of thing. And I think a lot of NFL coaches are very similar in that regard. They want these running backs to be well-rounded. So to that end, that's why I think these defensive players are going to end up sticking in more cases than not from the G5 level as opposed to their offensive counterparts. Any other final thoughts as we wrap up our part 2 of the NFL Draft G5 special?
No, not really. Like you said, it's a weird year for the G5. It's pretty, nobody at the top, but I do think that there's always those gems, those guys that come out of nowhere. I'm very curious to see. I'm just don't think like as you were talking, I started thinking about this. I'm very curious if we'll see down, going forward, if this year's trend continues between the combination of the transfer portal. You have a guy like Tinsley, where it's like Tinsley's not a G5 guy because he transferred, and he's going to go in the 7th round. Like I'm curious if we'll see in the future, like those. Would Khalil Mack have transferred from Buffalo if he could have? And will we see those kind of big name first round pick guys transfer to P5 schools so they won't really count as G5s? And then on the flip side, which is great for us in college football, is you also have the added with NIL, where instead of being a 7th round pick, go back to school. Frank Harris is probably going to make more at UTSA than he will in the NFL. Michael Pratt, you have these guys that are college football studs that, not that either of them probably would have come out, but there's a lot more incentive now to stay in college if you're going to be one of these late round G5 draft picks. So I'm curious if we'll start to see less and less G5 guys, in the draft, in the top of the draft. And if that's, as the G5 guys, I do think the NIL factor is going to be good for us in that sense, because we'll get to, we get to see Frank Harris again in college. We get to see Michael Pratt. We get to see those guys. So I'm curious to see if this is just a weird year where there's not a ton of high end talent, or if it's going to be a trend with between NIL and the portal. If we won't see as many high G5 guys.
Yeah, I mean, we did see it at Western Kentucky this year with Austin Reed, going in the portal, and then all of a sudden he's got a new car. I guess they threw together a bake sale or something. It's like you don't necessarily need SEC God money to keep one guy. It's like, hey, can you get 70 grand together for, a convertible? Okay. Now all of a sudden things are a little bit more amenable between these players and the schools that gave him a chance in the first place. So yeah, I think that's an interesting story to continue to watch, because this will be the first year in the history of the draft, potentially, that there's no G5 players taken in the first 2 rounds of the draft. So is that trend? Is that an anomaly? We're going to keep on top of it. But either way, we're going to be spotlighting.
Grayson McCall's a good example of that,
yeah.
Where do you think McCall would have been drafted if he came out, but he, got the bag to transfer? So
it is interesting. I thought there was a chance he was going to go to Liberty. I thought he was going to go to the Power 5 level. It's now this free agent palooza every single year, and there's not necessarily an off switch for it. There's different windows. We're now in this secondary window where you could see some players transfer, some quarterbacks who don't end up getting their starting jobs, leaving after spring practice. So a lot to monitor. To that end, we'll be back.
Yeah, McCall ended up staying.
McCall's still at Coastal Carolina. So,
but he probably got back to do that.
Yeah, I would imagine that's, despite the fact that he pisses teal, he probably needed a little bit of green to go with that as well.
Hey, McCall, you want a bunch of money to stay on the beach, or do you want to go play for, God knows who, the Arizona Cardinals? It's like, stay on the beach.
For Mike Iannello, I'm Mike Calabrese. This has been the Big Bets on Campus podcast, brought to you by BetMGM, our Group of 5 Deep Dive Draft Special, Part 2, now in the books. We're going to be back during this offseason with some more content, getting you ready for August as we get into, in earnest, the win totals, the conference futures, national title futures, playoff futures. If you want to light some money on fire, go ahead with some G5 national title futures. But there's always a chance that someone puts together that dream season. We'll do our G5 draft again. Hopefully this year one of us actually picks a winner, although our beloved producer Matt Mitchell, I think, was pretty happy with his Tulane win. I believe it was a nice fancy bowl game quarter zip. So we're going to have more content. As I mentioned, the new BCS is back on Thursday with Colin Stuckey and Brett McMurphy. So be sure to check that out. Thanks so much for listening, and enjoy the draft Thursday through Saturday.